ever since I was a child. I understood the body differently than most. Other kids scraped their knees, cried, and ran to their mothers. I leaned closer. I wanted to see. Blood wasn't something to fear. It was proof that something was happening under the skin. Hidden, but alive. I remember the first time I cut myself washing dishes, a slip of the knife, a bead of red swelling at my fingertip. My mother panicked, shoved a towel into my hand, called me clumsy, but I just stared, mesmerized. The sting came after the blood, not before. The body spoke in layers, and I was learning its language. By 12, I could name bones and arteries better than friends' birthdays. Artery, vein, nerve, organ. Each one felt like a secret door I wasn't supposed to open. Sometimes after school, I'd sneak into the science lab. The room smelled of formaldehyde and damp paper towels. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. I'd lift the plastic covers from the trays and trace where we'd cut. Clean lines, soft tissue parting like pages of a forbidden book. The silence in that room was heavy, reverent. When I moved the scalpel, it sounded like someone breathing. At home, I hid anatomy books under my bed. Like other kids hid magazines, I'd sketch muscles and tendons instead of faces. Once, I tried to fix my doll. After I tore its arm, I wrapped it in gauze, sliced the seam open with nail scissors, and stitched it back together. The thread left neat rows, too perfect for a toy. I remember feeling proud until my father saw. He shouted my name like it was a curse. My mother pulled the doll away, muttering prayers. They didn't understand that it wasn't cruelty, it was curiosity. I wanted to know how things fit, how they broke, how they could be made whole again. They burned my drawings in the fireplace that night. I can still smell the paper, ink, and heat, and the faint sweetness of melting graphite. They said it wasn't normal. They said I was sick, but as the pages curled into black lace, I realized they were wrong. I wasn't sick. I was awake. There was a movie I used to watch in secret. A faded VHS I found in a thrift store, a medical drama. Though it felt more like a sermon, there was one scene I played until the tape warped. An autopsy. The chest opened with a single, deliberate line. No music, no screaming, just the scalpel parting flesh, the sound crisp as tearing fabric. The organs were lifted, measured, weighed, recorded. A person turned into a map of itself. I watched it long after my parents had gone to bed. The blue light flickered across my walls, across my hands. Each time the chest opened, I felt a little calmer. Other kids had nightmares about monsters. Mine were about scalpels and bone saws, and they weren't nightmares. They were invitations. I used to imagine what it would be like to be the one holding the blade, not to harm, but to understand, to see what life really looked like when you peeled it back. But life doesn't hand you scalpels at 12. It hands you math homework and report cards and chores. So I buried the hunger under textbooks and late-night study sessions. I told myself that one day I'd find a way to use it, to turn fascination into purpose. So I became a nurse. Helping people made sense, learning their rhythms, their pain, their healing. It felt safe, respectable. I told myself I'd stay on the right side of the line, the side that keeps people breathing. For years, I believed that lie, that I loved the living instead of the dead. But lies don't last forever, and one night, everything split. The call came at 2:17 a.m. The radio cracked like a bone, breaking through skin, snapping me out of the half-sleep that clings to night shift nurses. Trauma inbound, car accident, male 30s. For a heartbeat, the ward was silent. Just the hum of vents, the rhythmic beep of monitors, the faint whisper of an IV pump. Then the double doors at the end of the corridor slammed open, and the world changed shape. Cold air swept through, sharp with the smell of gasoline, rubber, and blood. The gurney wheels squealed on tile, scattering droplets that looked black under the fluorescent lights. Paramedics barked vitals as they ran, their voices hoarse from shouting over sirens. I snapped on gloves, latex clinging tight against my wrists. The patient's face was half gone beneath the blood, his chest rising in shallow, wet gasps that sounded more like luck than life. One eye fluttered open, unfocused, and closed again. His jeans were shredded, asphalt ground deep into his skin. Pressures dropping, someone called. The doctor barked orders. The resident stumbled for saline. The monitor screamed. The suction hissed, a snake in the corner. A metal tray crashed to the floor. Everything happened fast, but my mind slowed. My hands were steady. They always are. I pressed on his abdomen. Heat surged beneath my palms, soaking through gauze. The smell of iron filled the air, metallic and sweet. And somewhere deep inside me, something woke up. It wasn't horror. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Beneath that ruined skin was a secret world. Arteries trembling like rivers, ribs like gates, organs glistening in the dark. Everything I'd ever wanted to see was there, waiting. I blinked hard, tried to drown the thought in training. Clamp, compress, count, chart. But the thought didn't sink. It floated just below the surface, bright and impossible to ignore. Stay with us, the doctor muttered. Come on, stay with us. He turned to grab sutures. The resident bent for gauze, and for one thin breath, I was alone with him. My gloved hand pressed down again. A little deeper this time. The gauze shifted. Skin gave way. My fingers slid inside. Warmth swallowed me to the knuckle. The monitor shrieked a rising pitch that cut through the noise like a siren meant only for me. The others spun around. Pressure's not holding, I said. My voice sounded perfect, urgent, frightened, believable. The doctor shoved me aside, his shoulder brushing mine. Move, move. Adrenaline surged through the room like static. The paddles came out. The code began, voices stacking over each other in practiced desperation. But I already knew. He was gone. Minutes later, the tone flattened into forever. Time of death, 2:46 a.m. The team exhaled in unison, shoulders sagging under the weight of failure. Someone patted the resident's back. The paramedics filled out paperwork with shaking hands. The room smelled of sweat and bleach and loss. I didn't move. I stood there, gloves dripping red, staring at the still body on the table. I should have felt grief, or guilt, or at least the dull ache of empathy I'd been taught to fake on bad nights. Instead, I felt something else, something clean, harmony. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning, just long enough for me to hear its heartbeat. I peeled off my gloves slowly, one finger at a time. The latex snapped, little gunshots in the quiet. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the echo of what they'd touched. The rest of the shift blurred into coffee and paperwork, the kind that smells like ink and denial. Someone cried in the supply closet. Another nurse whispered a prayer into her palms. The doctor rubbed his temples, muttering that it never gets easier. I hummed under my mask, something tuneless, something soft. The sound steadied me. By morning, the sun bled through the hospital windows, turning the floor a pale yellow. Everyone looked tired, human again. Everyone except me, because somewhere between 2:17 and 2:46 a.m., I'd remembered who I was, and it wasn't enough. Daylight didn't wash it away. If anything, it made it more visible. Like a stain you only see once the light hits it just right. The drive home felt endless. The streets were wet and blue under the first light of morning. I rolled the window down to breathe, but the air tasted metallic, thin. My gloves were still on the passenger seat, folded neatly, as if I'd meant to keep them. I told myself to throw them out. I didn't. I parked and sat there for almost an hour, engine ticking as it cooled. The radio played something soft and cheerful that didn't belong to this world. I watched the hospital lights fade behind me and thought about the warmth that had filled my hands, the way his pulse had fluttered once, then stopped. Every heartbeat since then felt borrowed. When I finally went upstairs, my apartment felt wrong, too quiet, too clean. Beige walls, the hum of the fridge, the faint smell of last night's coffee. I stripped off my scrubs and dropped them into the washer. Hot water, bleach, spin. The sound filled the silence. I showered until my skin burned. The water stung, but I stayed under it anyway, watching steam coil around me like ghost breath. My hands shook as I washed them again and again, though they were already raw. I wasn't trying to get clean. I was trying to feel something other than the memory of heat and blood. Sleep never came. When I closed my eyes, I saw the hospital ceiling lights pulsing above me like eyes. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of rib cages opening like wings. By the next night, I'd convinced myself it was a one-time slip. Shock, adrenaline, nothing more. I smiled at coworkers, nodded through briefings, took vitals, joked about coffee, pretended. But the world looked different now. People didn't look like people anymore. They looked like puzzles, tender and temporary, held together by luck. In the grocery store, I caught myself staring at a man's neck, watching the pulse under his skin. On the bus, I studied a woman's ribs when she coughed, the rhythm of expansion and release. In line at the pharmacy, I noticed the curve of a stranger's wrist, where veins traced delicate blue paths. I told myself it was curiosity. Curiosity is harmless, isn't it? Except curiosity never sleeps. It hums, it whispers, it waits. The whisper followed me home. It sat at the foot of my bed when I tried to rest. It hovered over my shoulder while I brushed my teeth. It laughed softly when I told myself I was fine. Soon, even the hospital felt smaller, the walls too bright, the voices too human. I started to crave the quiet that comes after the noise, the stillness that feels like truth. That's when I began walking new routes home, down streets I'd never taken, past alleys that smelled of rain and rust and secrets. The city after midnight is another body altogether. Arteries of light, veins of traffic, the pulse of neon under wet pavement, and like any living thing, it bleeds if you press hard enough. That's where I saw him for the first time. He was nothing special. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. A tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. The kind of man who apologizes when you bump into him, even if it's your fault. He wore the same jacket every morning and kept his keys on a string around his neck. I noticed him because he walked his dog at dawn. When the streets are gray and empty and everything feels suspended between dreams and waking, I began to learn his patterns, the way I once learned heart rhythms, bus times, coffee stops, the hour his lights went out. It wasn't deliberate at first, it was habit. Observation is second nature to nurses. We notice, record, remember. That's all I was doing, at least. That's what I told myself. Days passed, then weeks. Curiosity softened into ritual. I started timing my walks to cross paths with him. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he smiled. The first time he said, "Good morning," I felt my pulse jump like a spark under skin. He left his phone face up on cafe tables. Sometimes he forgot it there. He looked like someone the world barely noticed, and I realized that made him perfect. Ordinary people disappear every day. One morning, rain threatened, but never came. He stopped to tie his shoe, and I passed close enough to smell him. Coffee, soap, damp fabric. He glanced up. Our eyes met, and something in the air locked. That was all it took. We talked the next day. Small talk about the weather, the city, his dog. His voice was warm, careless, easy to like. When he laughed, he leaned in slightly, like he wanted to share something private. He invited me up for coffee, because politeness demands it, because no one suspects the calm ones. His apartment was small and lived in. Photographs leaned against the wall, a half-finished book on the bed, a jar of coins on the counter. The dog slept in a corner, tail flicking in dreams. Everything about the place felt temporary, as if he'd only just arrived in his own life. We talked about nothing, movies, food, the kind of rain that never really stops. He offered me sugar, and I said no. He smiled again, and in that smile, I saw it. The thin line between living and being alive. I don't remember the exact moment it shifted. Maybe when he turned his back to rinse the mugs. Maybe when he said my name. Maybe when the whisper inside me finally said, "Now." One moment he was smiling. The next he wasn't. The room went still, like air holding its breath. No chaos, no screaming, just the hum of the fridge and the steady beat of my own pulse. It didn't take long. It never does when you know what you're doing. Afterward, I sat beside him for a while. The dog had hidden under the bed. Rain began to fall at last, tapping against the windows like soft applause. I watched the droplets race each other down the glass and thought about how easily they could pass for tears. When I finally moved, it was with precision. Sheets stripped, surfaces scrubbed, bleach where bleach belonged. The body, just another patient I didn't have to save. I cleaned until my hands ached, until the smell of iron drowned beneath the burn of chemicals. By dawn, the apartment looked untouched. The air outside felt cold and new. For the first time in my life, I felt pure, because this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a compulsion. It was the beginning of something vast, and somewhere behind me, the city kept breathing slow, steady, unaware.